Good afternoon and welcome to the Wall Street Bulls and Bears podcast. We're joined today by Daniel Cotter. Dan is an experienced attorney who has served in a variety of legal roles in his career, including as general counsel of a large life insurance company, extensive experience in private practice. Dan's mix of clients includes insurance companies and other financial institutions, IT and consulting companies, and nonprofits. He has been working on privacy and cybersecurity issues since 1996, including the development of terms and conditions and disclaimers on Fortune 500 websites in the late 1990s. He has been chief privacy officer of several companies and law firms and has extensive experience as in-house counsel. He deals with complex insurance regulatory issues and transactions and substantial reorganizations of holding companies. He has negotiated thousands of contracts from simple to complex. He is also an author of The Chief Justices, the 17 Men at the Center Seat, Their Courts and Their Times, and writes a weekly column for Chicago Daily Law Bulletin focusing on the SCOTUS, rule of law, and the future of the Republic, including fake news. He joins us today to talk about fake news, AI, cybersecurity, you name it. So welcome, Dan.
Well, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here and look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much. Is there such a thing as a legal framework to curtail fake news? Fake news isn't new, but technology has amplified it, and now it's hard for me even to tell what's real, what's not, and some of it just borders on much more than ridiculous, but very dangerous. So what can be done to curtail this? What steps can be taken to not infringe on free speech, but to help separate facts from this utter garbage that we see?
And it is utter garbage, and it's getting worse, like you said. I think, as you said, fake news is not something that's new. If you read some of the political campaigns in the United States going back to the late 1700s, early 1800s, a lot of scurrilous, libelous types of information. But as we're talking about and preparing for this, the news out there is just astounding. So I saw a report last week that last year in 2022, 47% of all internet traffic came from bots. And just let that sink in. So these are not human beings, but they're either farms of misinformation or other things. We've seen the elections in 2020. So let's take a step back. You had asked about whether there's a framework, a legal framework, and the short answer is no, right? You've got free speech, and what I always tell people is that if you look at the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment is probably the most clear in terms of what the federal government can do, at least theoretically, right? It says Congress shall make no law that abridges the freedom of speech and all the 6 rights in the First Amendment, including religion and all that stuff. But the challenge has always been is that there are time, place, and manner and other restrictions, right? You can't, the best case is the reference by Oliver Wendell Holmes in the early 1900s. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater, right? Because you don't want people to panic and leave. You can't necessarily protest in public without getting permits and things like that. So there's really there's not a really good framework. And I go back to a couple of years ago, my undergraduate, the communications and government affairs people visited a public relations firm in Chicago, and the vice president there, the number 2 person at the company, he was the AP editor for the Chicago Tribune for a long time and had 9 people down in Springfield, Illinois, and other places. And what he told these students was, I've never forgotten it. He said, back in the day, all the news and media, we had long-term kind of timelines. You look at the movie like Moonlight or some of those other, or Spotlight, or you look at Deep Throat, you look at those types of things where stories played out, people had time. He said, now facts don't matter. What matters is getting to the market, right? And it doesn't matter who does it, who's publishing it, whether it's fake or not. As we talked about before, this started as well. My father-in-law and I went to lunch with my wife yesterday to celebrate Mother's Day, and he was relaying a story to me because he knows I do some of this stuff. And he talked about this. He'd seen a news report, I think it was, about ChatGPT made up references. And so this morning I looked, and sure enough, it's from the Guardian, and it talks about this author was approached, and they said, "Hey, this is a great article by you." He said the title didn't make any sense, but it's the topics he would have written about. And what happened was this AI, the ChatGPT, it made up out of whole cloth references. So it referred to various articles, and then had like a bibliography at the end of it. There were 3 or 4 articles. None of them existed. They were just made up. And so the artificial intelligence, talk about fake news, this is fake bot news, right? It's artificial intelligence. And it really blows my mind because, like you said, it's how do you distinguish in this? We have more information at our fingertips on every phone in the world than we had the entire history of time, right? There's no library that has this information. And how you decipher that is very difficult. And then top that off with one of the things that's becoming a bigger concern and issue is you see that you can manipulate videos, right? And so language, and so there's a lot of this stuff coming out now. President Obama or President Trump or President, whatever it is, right? Or a politician. And it looks like they said it, right? Because it's all just kind of used in technology. Between you and me and all listeners, I really fret for the future of truth because I don't know how you go about deciphering that. And what, and if ChatGPT is making up articles and they look legit, how would you or I know if I went out and looked and up a topic and one of the top hits is an article that looks like it's a true article, but it's fake? I mean, it's mind-boggling how we're going to get through this.
It is mind-boggling. Actually, we posted a research article on AI, and after it was posted, we read who was considered the godfather of AI. He quit Google and then said, "Oh, this AI stuff is so dangerous." It was really wild, but I guess too late. It's out of the gate, so we've got to deal with it.
Yeah, and it's again, and the mind-blowing fact, like I said, 2022, almost half of all internet traffic was from bots. I mean, again, I don't know how we, and one of the things I think is key, is I think in most places, these bots and that we talk about Russian influence in the U.S. of politics and stuff, but a lot of it's homegrown, right? And it just exacerbates kind of the divide and mix and puts people in camps, right? Because whatever they're looking at, whether it's fake or not, they kind of buy into it, right? It's almost cultish, right? Okay, this is my position, and here's some stuff that supports it. And for all we know, it's a bot or just fake as all get out. And again, I experienced this a little bit when I was writing my book, the Chief Justice, as you mentioned. I found about one of the Chief Justices from the early times, guy who had written a biography, and it was referred to as a biography, and it had some stuff in there that I just thought, this is hogwash, right? This can't be fact. And then I dug a little bit deeper, and he was kind of romanticizing the guy, and it again made up some stuff in the biography. And so I looked at it, and then I didn't use it in the book, and because I wasn't able to verify it, and it didn't pass the kind of the smell test. But again, like you said, it's been out there a long time, but I think now we're just in a whole different ballgame because of AI, because of the internet, because of all the social media tools that we have available to us.
Beyond truth, I guess from an education standpoint, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. I imagine medical science, all that stuff, people reading stuff that seems to be legitimate and it's just utter garbage. Are there any current initiatives that can be more effective than another? Granted, there isn't a legal framework, but what can be done to, say, push back or label or limit or, somehow within the confines of the law to deal with some of the stuff?
I think at one point, a couple of years ago, some of the social media platforms were trying to do that and ferret it out. And we saw Twitter, changed hands now, and a lot of questions about, what's going on with the leadership there and kind of whether they're, I saw last week, for example, Turkish elections, I think it was, and they banned certain postings, of opposition. And so real questions exist there. I go back to the thing that, one thing, and I think it's the genie's left the bottle on this too, but I think is important is that, some of the well-established, whether it's the Washington Examiner, if you're conservative, or Wall Street Journal, or Washington Post, New York Times, or some of these papers, and some of the, the Forbes of the world, and some of those, I think that we've kind of gone overboard, and people are all like everything's fake news, and like, do the papers and broadcasting, do they make mistakes? I think they do, but it's always been that way, right? First page would be a headline, and then 2 days later on the eighth page, of the sports section,
Correction.
something,
Yeah.
a correction. But I think that somehow we need to reestablish that, the people that are journalists. I know people in Chicago and in other jurisdictions that are journalists, they all go by a code of ethics and principles, right? And they've got that. So I think we need to get back to that. But I think, again, how do you do that, right? With all this fake stuff out there, with all the challenges with social media, anybody can be an expert. And that's, again, I think on social media, on the internet, anybody can start a blog, anybody can start a Substack, anybody can start a newsletter. But I think we need to get back to some of those common principles and say, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? The old saying. And I think that's what's happened here is in 2020s, we've kind of said, it's all garbage, right? And you hear that all the time, right? Like, everybody's biased and there's no good news. And there's some of that, but I think we need to revisit that. I also think that we need to take a look at these 24/7 news stations, CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, and really make it clear that those are in the entertainment business. They're looking for provocative angles and talking heads, and write the debates, because that's what gets commercials, that's what gets viewers, that turns into money for them, right? So
Do you think something like that, instead of labeling things as news, but as entertainment, or as, disclaimer with the stuff, wouldn't that help? Because people just listen to things and believe it's facts, right?
maybe it's information or something, right? It's not information, it's not news. Because I think the problem is that everything's labeled as news, and again, there's a lot of, you see kind of these charts and continuums from the way left to the way right, and there's all kinds of these newsletters and daily reposts and all this stuff, right? And like you said, I don't know, I think that labeling stuff as news channels, if you do watch, it's not really news, right? It's, there's 5 minutes of news at the top of the hour or bottom, or maybe, and then there's 17 minutes before commercials of talking heads kind of angling, and again, trying to get the people in their cult to be on the same page, right? And like you said, it's labeled as news, and it's not news. And again, I don't know, there's probably not enough fact checkers and enough people to constantly be saying, no, that's not really what's going on. So sadly, there's no, from a lawyer's perspective, we like rules, we like kind of, boxes and frameworks and, ways to be able to advise. And in this arena, I'm not sure that anything fits nicely into kind of that compartmentalized, this is how we fix the issue.
Mm. What's scary about that? Well, also to hear it from a lawyer, that's really discouraging, I guess. Like, that there's not much that can be done. But for someone like myself, I'm just thinking, so it's not illegal to lie. So you can go on TV and lie. So like, apparently, but the minute like they go those news labeled news organizations, they say the truth, completely a polar opposite to what their news station said. And
Right.
surely there's got to be something around, like, that, I don't know, like, it is frustrating.
Yeah, and there's a book that's out. It's a group of essays. It's called Myth America. That's edited by a couple of folks, and I just finished kind of looking at it, and it points back to there was the fairness doctrine that used to exist. And then that was during the Reagan administration that was kind of removed. And again, I don't know how you get it back to a point that it makes sense. And again, you saw the Fox News Dominion thing, where, they didn't admit any fault, but they did say that they had made some misstatements, with respect to it, and the chatter behind didn't really buy it. So to your point, and it's every channel, and again, it seems there's got to be some remedy, but given free speech and given opinions and given it's, all kind of masked as like political views, right? It's troubling to figure out exactly how, again, can this be fixed, as AI proliferates and gets smarter, potentially. Again, I don't know how we how we ferret through the haystack for the needle.
Wow, well, AI seems to be getting not really smarter, like, better at compiling information, but it's making humans dumber. It's just, so unfortunate, the complete opposite of what we would have wanted. Switching gears a little bit
Yeah.
to what other stuff that you've done, what's the number one thing you wish all lay people knew from a legal standpoint, and why?
One of the things that I always advise my clients, and I spend a lot of time in house at big companies, as you mentioned in my introduction, and I deal with a lot of startups, but a lot of big companies as well. The one thing I think everybody I wish would know is like with medical or other things. People, I go out to WebMD constantly, and everything I could be either scared or think that I know what I'm diagnosing, right? My shoulder hurts, so I think it's broken collarbone, or it's a spread of tumors or whatever, right? And it's the same with law. One of the things that I always tell people is don't be penny wise. And what I mean by that is so many startups, and I run into this all the time. Legals, like everything else, like medical, like plumbing, like electricians out of your house. We're not the cheapest, resource. But if you spend an hour's worth of my time up front looking at contracts, looking at decisions to buy real estate, looking at a will, whatever it is, right? The amount of savings you would have on the back end, to me, is multiples, right? Because what I see often happens is I get stuff that's already been signed by my clients, and they say, I don't want to bother with legal, I don't want to spend the money, and now take a look at this, and sometimes the terms are terrible, right? They can't get out of it. There's huge exit fees, or it's just the onus and the responsibility is crazy, right? And so that's one thing I wish people would understand is that. And number two is that, again, like medical, like almost anything, just like with the fake news we spent, the 20 minutes on, and AI, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of contracts, a lot of things, but it would be like me trying to fix a car, having no idea, and just having a full toolbox. My son used to build bikes in the garage. He's got all kinds of wrenches and stuff, but I don't know if the one wrench is right, or if I need to use a hammer, right? And so it's the same with law. Be careful, what you're looking at and what you're using. And if you're using something, make sure that it's the right thing for the right circumstance. That makes
Hmm,
sense.
that's great advice. What's the most common legal issue you run into in your practice? So you just gave some general advice about using a lawyer. So it could be whether it's insurance or financial institutions, or even venture capital. Whoever comes to you, what's the most common legal issue that you encounter, and how would you advise our listeners to avoid that?
It depends on the circumstances, but one thing that we run into often, both in investments, M&A, contracts, employment, is independent contractor versus employee, and how you compensate someone. One of the things that happens, and it happened in Silicon Valley back in the day, a lot of companies want to classify people as independent contractors because of the savings of cost, right? When venture capital comes in, they often look at that. And a lot of times too, it's the pay. A lot of companies are sweat equity only. They give out some shares, and the Department of Labor, US government, and the IRS takes a look at that and says, you know what, in most cases, there's not for every Microsoft or Groupon or Twitter, there's, gazillion companies where the shares, are wallpaper at best, right? They're not worth anything. And so with the 13th Amendment in the United States Constitution, right, slavery and indentured servitude, you have to pay at least minimum wages. So a lot of stuff comes up in that arena. And that the other thing that you mentioned and that I do a fair amount of is privacy and cyber. I think more and more that comes up in almost every transaction of any kind. And the reason for that is whether someone's getting cyber insurance. And again, on transactions, you talk about venture capital and stuff, they're going to want to make sure that, if they're buying somebody or investing in it, that they have adequate cyber insurance in place, that they've got good privacy protocols and procedures. And it's ever changing. We now have 7 states that have a comprehensive privacy legislation that's been passed in the last few years. California was the first. Indiana is the most recent, and then Montana and Tennessee. Tennessee just signed one. Montana's about to. Are those issues and trying to keep track and figure out how you can be out again in this internet and social media and all this stuff without running afoul of those laws.
No, very good. What about intellectual property? Like, do you run into that and issues around that a lot?
Yeah, there's a lot of this, yeah, a lot of, again, venture capitals looking at that. The way that it's accounted for on balance sheets, right, is just research and development costs. So that oftentimes that's not a big part of the balance sheet, but in transactions and investments, they're really looking at the intellectual property, looking at patents, and there's a lot of challenges, right? Especially in the patent world. I don't know that anybody's ever had a patent that wasn't challenged at some way or form, right? Just because if you add on things, you can get a patent for the improvements, and a lot of fights about whether something's specific enough. We get trademark cease and desist. Folks oftentimes use logos from sports teams, or they use logos from, say Disney or something, and or Peanuts, whatever it is, right? And those companies aggressively and those organizations aggressively pursue. And so we get into that as well sometimes. And so another area where it's very important to really understand that.
What if you wake up tomorrow and you see a whole bunch of articles published by Daniel Cotter that you had nothing to do with? Who do you sue? A bot? Like, what
Well,
can
right.
you
How
do?
do you, right? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how you track that down. I mean, it's, again, some of the technology stuff, I think we're in a new frontier, and it's, you think about, again, the chat GPT that made those up. You hear stories about, the artificial intelligence doing deals together and some kind of detection of laughing or some kind of emotions. It's, but the thing that, and there's always threats, the legal profession, there's new articles every day about whether chat GPT and artificial intelligence is going to be the end of lawyers. What I always tell people is that, if you're studying now, if you're new to the professions, even if you're someone like me, to try to learn some of these things, because if you think about it, artificial intelligence is all based on programming, right? It's programming, and if you're an architect, then architects should be doing the programming to make the artificial intelligence smarter, quote unquote, right? It's not really right. It's not getting smarter, right? Like you said, it's getting more developed or whatever. It has more things, but it's, because of the guidelines, because of the way it's programmed, it's getting to be like Westworld type of thing, right? Where the robots are, starting to become independent like this and making up articles and stuff. But I think that whatever your profession is, whether you're a lawyer, a Wall Street investor, a venture capitalist, the best way to, again, understand it is to play with it and to figure out how you can make it so it's better and more, more akin to what the profession actually does.
Yeah. In my opinion, it would be very difficult for, ChatGPT or any similar program or algo to replicate what a lawyer does. Sure, it might get stuff that you can Google and find, but with deals that require deep understanding, experience, that sort of, there's no way, that they can do that. So I don't think it's going to eliminate the need for lawyers. I think, though, content writing, some of that stuff for sure, like where, guaranteed some jobs will be replaced, but no disrespect,
Right,
intended
right.
to content writers or anything like that. But I think those type jobs might be, eliminated. A regulatory attorney, some of our listeners, of course, some of them would be savvy, but who might need a regulatory attorney in your world?
Sure. So my regulatory piece, the main focus has been where I spent a long time in house is in the insurance arena. But if you're in any industry, whether it's power or utilities, airplanes, investments, FINRA, banking, insurance, there's a lot of regulatory overlay. And so almost any listener to this podcast probably has some aspect, depending on what they do. If they're an investor, like I said, if they're a broker dealer, if they're private equity, there may be some, SEC overlays and stuff. A lot of regulations exist at the state, federal, local levels, and like I said, utilities, insurance for sure. Just a lot of heavily regulated industries that are out there.
Thank you so much. And what are your thoughts on the Writers Guild strike? When do you think that'll be resolved? Do you have any idea what the outcome will be? I mean, just from.
Yeah, I think, my understanding of it, and not a complete expert on it, but my understanding is that with all these streaming services, that they've been really focused on paying for the talent that's, on film, and whether it's, Netflix or Amazon Prime or any of these things. I think that's been at the heart of this. I hope it gets resolved quickly. I think that the challenge will be is how do you balance that? And I think what the Writers Guild, their complaint is that no money's being spent on the actual show itself. And I don't watch it, but Ted Lasso, some of my friends watch it. Is that the name of it, Ted Lasso? They said that the last season was not very good. They're questioning that. I'm a big Mandalorian fan. The last season was kind of not, it didn't seem like the scripts were that good. So those might be microcosms, but hopefully, they can figure this out and get back to, and again, you said that, you don't think that, bots or algos or other things would be the solution for a lot of things. I think the same with kind of, drama and comedy and stuff. I don't know that some chat GPT can put together a script that, it'd probably be good for, if you were an eighth grade, producer, right? You had to do a story about something, but probably not going to be up to the snuff of what we expect from, good non, good scripted acting and production. So, and it, I think it's interesting. I've been reading a lot about Disney, and they're kind of revisiting. I think like Marvel and all the multiple and marketing and stuff. So I think again, I think COVID probably, like a lot of things, probably has had a major impact on this as well, just because not as many people in the seats probably, and so yeah, I think it's a challenge, and I hope it ends well, and that we get back to having those folks back soon.
No, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you a couple things. I'm going to ask you what good book you're reading that you'd recommend
Yeah,
to our listeners, but I'd also like you to talk about your book. The Chief Justice, the 17 Men
sure,
at the center. Tell us a bit about that, perhaps first, and
sure.
also tell our listeners where they can find you, how to reach you.
Sure. So you can find me at howardandhoward.com. So that's easy. That's my law firm website. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm active on LinkedIn. I write frequently. I do a podcast. My book was when I was in law school, and since, I started to get biographies from family and friends for birthdays and stuff. And one of the things that, like most professional training or most educational things, you just kind of go from thing to thing, right? You don't ever really get in the context, or in law, you might read a case in 1990, and then next case in the book is 1936. And so there's no context or anything. And so that kind of intrigued me. And so I started to do research, and then I taught a class, and then kind of the book came from that. And it's only men. People ask me why it's only men, and that because in the U.S. Supreme Court, chief justices have all been men. There's only been 6 females on the court in its history. 6 or 5? Trying to think. Right now, there's 4 on the court, so 6 total. And when Chief Justice John Roberts retires, down the line, we'll see who's president and what becomes of that. But that's that book. You asked about what I'm reading right now. I mentioned I just finished Myth America. I'm reading another book. It's called Foolproof. I think it's the name of it. I just started it. Just got it from the library Saturday. And again, it's about misinformation and lies and kind of the stuff we talked about for the first part of the show. And look forward to reading that. And then I'm reading a book of fiction right now. It's by a guy named by the name of Don Winslow, and it's the second part of a trilogy. It's about police and the police force. He's written some excellent books. He wrote about the drug cartels and kind of a saga that ended in the 2000s. And he's a really good writer and really good kind of a gritty fiction. A crime police and drug cartels in the streets, and that's very good. I think what else I've got. I just finished a book by Herman Melville that I never read before. It's called Bartleby the Scrivener, and it's a very, very short book. Melville I don't think, wrote very long books. It's about a copyist back in the 1800s. They used to make copies of legal documents, and he is just a strange character. He tells the lawyer that he prefer not to do readings of his copies, and then he won't do copy work anymore. And then he just kind of becomes a squatter in the office. The guy moves and he's still there. So somebody on LinkedIn had written about it. I'd never heard of it, and kind of it's a bizarre book. I mean, honestly, but and the guy ends up in jail. So those are some things I'm reading. I tend to read about 3-4 different books at the same time, kind of try to get through them. And so those are a couple of things I'm reading right now.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been fascinating speaking with you. Thank you so much. I got a little more optimistic towards the end. The first part was tough. I'll admit that. It's pretty depressing navigating this, but hopefully something enough there's got to be a breaking point where a lot of the folks are spreading what they know to be lies. It's one thing if you repeat something that you believe and you think it's true and it really, really isn't. But it's another
Right.
thing if you deliberately spreading disinformation and misinformation that has perhaps national security implications or other stuff. It's not a joke or medical stuff. So it's no laughing matter. But thank you so much for spending time with us. I'm going to check out some of those books and I'll stay in touch. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.